In the damp chill of a police holding cell in Ambato, Ecuador, a small, unremarkable man sat calmly, almost serenely. It was 1980. The officers who had arrested him for a failed abduction attempt thought they were dealing with a routine, if creepy, local degenerate. They were wrong. As the questions began, the man, Pedro Alonso López, looked at the investigators with a placid smile and offered a correction. The girl he'd tried to grab in the market was just one. A mistake. His real number, he claimed, was more than 100, and that was just in Ecuador. He told them, with the casual air of a man discussing the weather, that he preferred the little doves of Peru. He'd killed 100 there, too. And in his homeland of Colombia? Perhaps another 100. He couldn't be quite sure. The police stared in disbelief. They were not interrogating a man. They were sitting across from a void, a phantom who was now claiming to be the most prolific serial killer in human history. This is the story of that man, a man who earned the moniker, the Monster of the Andes. It is a story that defies comprehension, not only for the scale of its evil, a confession to over 300 murders, but for the chilling, bureaucratic apathy and systemic failure that allowed him to commit them, and then, inexplicably, to walk free. To understand the monster, one must first understand the man. Pedro Alonso López was born in 1948 in Tolima, Colombia, into a world of profound poverty and violence. His mother was a prostitute, and by his own account, his earliest memories were of chaos and abuse. The turning point, the original sin of his life, occurred when he was just 8 years old. He claims his mother, in a fit of rage after catching him in an inappropriate act with his younger sister, threw him out of the house, forcing him onto the streets of Bogota. This single act of abandonment set in motion a life that would become a case study in human depravity. A street urchin, he was eventually placed in a Roman Catholic orphanage, a place that should have been a sanctuary, but proved to be its own circle of hell. López alleged he was systematically abused by the priests entrusted with his care. He fled, only to find himself back on the streets, surviving through petty theft. At 18, he was taken in by a man who promised him work and lodging. Instead, the man and several of his friends brutally gang-raped the young López. This event, he would later claim, was the crucible that forged his hatred. He was no longer just a victim. He was becoming a predator. His response was not immediate, but it was decisive. He hunted down and murdered, by his own account, the men who had assaulted him. This act of vengeance was his dark baptism. Soon after, he was arrested, not for murder, but for car theft, and sent to a notoriously brutal prison in Peru called Siete Lunas. If the streets and the orphanage were his education, Siete Lunas was his graduate school. The prison was a lawless jungle. Within weeks, López was cornered by 4 other inmates who intended to rape and kill him. López, however, was no longer the boy from Bogota. He was something else. One by one, he methodically and viciously murdered all 4 of his attackers. This explosion of violence did not earn him condemnation from the other prisoners. It earned him respect. He had established himself as an apex predator. The guards, practicing a form of grim triage, effectively left him alone. He served only a few years of his sentence before being released in 1974. He was 26 years old, and a fully formed monster was now unleashed upon the world. What followed was a trilogy of death that spanned 3 nations, a reign of terror so vast it remains almost unfathomable. He began in Peru, the country that had imprisoned him. His targets were not random. He was meticulous, calculating, and patient. He focused his hunt on the indigenous tribes of the Andes, specifically the Ayacucho. He preyed on the poor, the marginalized, and the invisible. His method was chillingly simple. He would pose as a friendly traveler, a seller of trinkets, or even, blasphemously, a wandering monk. He had a disarming, non-threatening appearance. He was small, with a quiet voice, and a seemingly gentle demeanor. He would approach young girls, his little doves, as he called them, in crowded village markets or on lonely mountain paths. He would offer them candy, a small toy, or the promise of a better life in the city. Once he had gained their trust, He would lead them away to a secluded spot, often by a river or in a thick thicket. There he would assault and strangle them. For 4 years, he moved through the remote villages of Peru like a phantom. The disappearances were noted, but rarely connected. These were impoverished communities with little political power. Missing children were often chalked up to runaways or accidents. Lopez exploited this societal blindness. He later claimed to have murdered at least 100 girls in Peru alone. The spree only stopped when he was captured by the Ayacucho people themselves. They had finally connected the disappearances to the gringo who kept appearing in their villages. They caught him attempting to abduct a 9-year-old girl and prepared to execute him by their own tribal law, burying him alive. In a twist of cruel irony, a Western missionary intervened, arguing that he should be handed over to the civilized justice of the state. The tribe reluctantly agreed. The Peruvian police, however, proved fatally inept. They held him, but the charges were flimsy, the evidence circumstantial. They found no bodies. After a few months with no concrete case against him, the Peruvian authorities simply deported him. They washed their hands of the problem and pushed him across the border into Ecuador in 1978. Ecuador would become his primary hunting ground. The monster had been given a fresh start. He arrived in a country reeling from natural disaster. In 1977 and 1978, catastrophic floods had devastated the region around the city of Ambato. This tragedy provided Lopez with the perfect cover. As he began his killing spree again, using the same methods of luring young girls from markets, the bodies he left behind were often discovered in or near riverbeds. The police, already overwhelmed, frequently mistook these victims for the countless who had tragically drowned in the floods. Lopez operated with terrifying efficiency, often claiming he killed 2 or 3 girls per week. He frequented the golden triangle of cities, Quito, Ambato, and Otavalo, all of which hosted large, bustling indigenous markets. He was a ghost in the crowd, watching, selecting. He later told interviewers that he had a mission. He saw himself as a necessary evil, a cleanser. In his warped mind, he was saving these girls from the impurity of the life his mother had led. He felt no remorse. In fact, he kept photographs of some of his victims, a gallery of the dead that he carried with him. The disappearances mounted. In Ecuador, the alarm bells began to ring louder than they had in Peru. Scores of girls were vanishing. Posters with their faces papered the walls of police stations. The country was terrified of a sacagrasas, a fat stealer, a figure from Andean folklore who stole children. The myth had become a horrifying reality. Then, in April 1980, the monster made a mistake. He tried to abduct the young girl from a stall in the Ambato market. But this time, the girl's mother, a vendor, saw him. She screamed. Other vendors, already on high alert from the string of disappearances, sprang into action. They chased Lopez, cornered him, and beat him severely before the police arrived to arrest the bloody but still living predator. This brings us back to the holding cell. The police had the man, but they didn't believe the story. The numbers were too fantastical. 300 murders? It was the boast of a madman. But then, Lopez, in his calm, cooperative voice, offered to prove it. He led them to a field outside Ambato. He pointed, "Dig there." They dug. They found the body of a young girl. He pointed again, and again, and again.
The case exploded. It was a media sensation. A Canadian journalist, Ron Leitner, managed to secure a series of jailhouse interviews with Lopez. It was through these interviews that the world truly met the monster of the Andes. Leitner, a seasoned reporter, was unprepared for what he found. Lopez was not a gibbering lunatic. He was intelligent, articulate, and disturbingly proud. "I am the man of the century," Lopez boasted to Leitner. "They call me the Beast. I am a necessary evil. I am the cleaner. The girls in Ecuador were more gentle, more trusting, more innocent." He spoke of his crimes with a chilling detachment, describing his methods, his mission, and his absolute lack of guilt. He corrected Leitner when the reporter suggested he felt remorse. "I feel nothing," he said. He even criticized the police for their incompetence, explaining how easy it had been to elude them. He confirmed the numbers: 110 in Ecuador, 53 of which were now confirmed, 100 in Peru, and over 100 in Colombia. The total was well over 300. This single small man had a body count that eclipsed John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, and Jeffrey Dahmer combined, multiplied several times over. The trial in Ecuador was swift. Despite the 53 bodies and his confession to 110 murders in that country alone, the maximum sentence allowed by Ecuadorian law at the time was 16 years. The nation was outraged. The law was the law. He was sentenced in 1980. With later extensions, his sentence was pushed to 20 years, the absolute maximum. Lopez was, by all accounts, a model prisoner at the psychiatric hospital of Santa Marianita de Jesus in Quito, Ecuador. He was polite, clean, and cooperative. He worked in the prison garden. The psychiatrists who evaluated him were split. Some saw an unrepentant psychopath, others saw a man who had been reformed. The world for a time forgot about him. Then, in 1994, the unthinkable happened. After serving only 14 years, Pedro Alonso López was released from prison in Ecuador for good behavior. The decision was a bureaucratic formality that unleashed a nightmare. He was immediately deported back to his native Colombia. The Colombian authorities, faced with this phantom killer, were in a bind. They had no outstanding warrants for him. His alleged 100-plus murders in their country were decades old, unproven, and had never been investigated. They couldn't simply let him go, so they committed him to the psychiatric ward of the Loortua Hospital in Bogotá. The world's most prolific serial killer was now just another patient in an underfunded psychiatric hospital. 4 years later, in 1998, the final terrifying chapter of his official story was written. A Colombian psychiatrist declared Pedro Alonso López sane. The hospital ruled that they had no legal basis to hold him any longer. In early 1998, Pedro Alonso López was given $50 in travel money and released onto the streets of Bogotá. He vanished. In the years since, the story of the monster of the Andes has become a dark legend. His disappearance triggered an international manhunt. Interpol issued a global warrant for his arrest, a warrant that remains active to this day. There have been rumors, sightings, and false leads. A man matching his description was rumored to be involved in a 2002 murder, but it was never confirmed. Is he dead? He would be in his mid-70s today. Did he die in obscurity, a frail old man taking his secrets to the grave? Or did the monster, upon tasting freedom, simply return to his mission? Did he change his name, cross another border, and continue to hunt his little doves? The Andes Mountains are vast, and the poor, marginalized communities he preyed upon are still in many ways invisible. It is entirely possible that Pedro Alonso López continued his work, adding to a body count that is already beyond comprehension. The true horror of Pedro Alonso López is twofold. First, there is the man himself, a chilling void of empathy, a highly intelligent and disciplined predator who turned his own horrific victimization outward, projecting it onto the most innocent subjects he could find. He is a testament to the terrifying potential of a human soul completely devoid of compassion. But the second, and perhaps more profound horror, is the system that failed to stop him. He was a monster forged in abuse, honed in a brutal prison, and then ignored by the authorities in Peru. He was caught by Ecuadorian police only to be defeated by a legal system incapable of comprehending, let alone punishing, his crimes. And finally, he was certified sane and released by the very system meant to protect the public from him. Pedro Alonso López is more than a man. He is a ghost, a cautionary tale. He proved that the most terrifying monster isn't the one that hides in the shadows, but the one that walks in plain sight, smiling, disarming, and exploiting a world that too often chooses not to see. Somewhere, perhaps in the mountains, perhaps in a crowded city, the monster of the Andes may still be walking. Or perhaps he is gone. The only certainty is the trail of over 300 broken families he left behind, and the chilling, unanswered question, how many more were there?